Welcome to Closer to Venus. I'm Johnny Burke, and today's guest is Crystal Cassidy. She is a scientist and a mystic and founder of SoulPod, a company with a mission to empower the modern mystic and capture the intersection of science and spirituality. In this episode, we will discuss events that inspired her to create this company, as well as what she's learned from contact with extraterrestrials. Crystal, welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me.
A scientist and a mystic. How exactly did that happen? In other words, what came first?
Good question. I think the scientist came first. I have a very strong analytical mind, almost photographic, so I'm able to remember material really easily. And so science just made sense to me when I was younger. Studied biochemistry, got into toxicology, pharmaceutical research, genomic diagnostics, and just a real fascination with understanding how systems work and complex systems and complicated systems. And I think the mystical side came in later. I had been a meditator since I was 12. I did martial arts for a good chunk of my youth. I was very dedicated to that study and traveled the world with that community. And meditation was a part of the training. And so I didn't know it at the time, but I was starting to get exposed to that mystical component. But at first it was about flow. And I knew that if I got my mindset, I could really tell whether or not in a performance or a competition, I was going to win or lose before I got into that ring. And so that fascinated me. I was really curious. And then as I got deeper into meditation in my 20s, I started having the mystical experiences, the transcendent experiences, the central channel activation or Kundalini awakening. And so that started to come in, and the scientist in me was very interested in understanding that and how that whole system works.
Well, the Kundalini awakening, it's a pretty intense experience, isn't it?
It is. Yeah. I think I was lucky in some regards because I had been doing meditation for so long that it was intense. There's this intensity at the very base of your central channel, which a lot of times people mistaken as being solely sexual energy. And there is that component, but it's just because it's activating in that area of the body and those nerves get activated. But as it moves up, all other kinds of nerves get activated as well. And eventually it reaches the brain, and you have this really intense oneness experience where you go from believing that we're all connected to actually experiencing that connection directly. And you can't really unsee that or unknow it once you've experienced it.
That sounds like what many people call oneness.
Yeah.
Separation is an illusion. The experiences seem to be similar to a near-death experience. Now, I know that you had one of those as well, but are there parallels or not necessarily?
I think that's a really interesting observation because there definitely are parallels. One of them is the idea and experience of surrender. And with a near-death experience, you're forced into certain scenarios, but there is also this deeper understanding of what it means to surrender, which is to give yourself over to this bigger experience, to fall back into life and to let the ego or the analytical mind fade away. And ultimately with the near-death experience, that was my experience, is I finally had to just give it up. Give it over. And you find that in the central channel awakening, especially as you get into the higher energy centers, there's a point at which you're really being asked to jump off the cliff, and nobody can do that for you. It's a very personal experience, and you don't know what's on the other side of that. It's the pure unknown. It's the dying before you die, as Eckhart Tolle references. They're similar, certainly.
That was just a guess on my part, but I've heard people describe both. Okay. So you've had a very good introduction to the mystical world, and it's interesting that you came from more of a scientific background. You're better armed to analyze things.
Yes. For better or worse, yes.
So SoulPod, this is a spiritual wellness app for the light being in all of us. Love that, by the way. Does that imply we're all starseeds or not necessarily?
That's a good question. I think we're all light beings, truly. I think that's a very accurate term. We're not just this physical form. We're experiencing the physical form for a small amount of time. As far as star seeds, my definition of a star seed is a consciousness that has experiences outside of this planet and then is bringing that experience to this planet. My feeling is that most of us are, if not all of us. It feels very rare to me that a soul would only have the singular experience of being on this planet. I possibly could exist, but from my experience personally, most people I come across seem to have had some sort of connection to something outside of this physical planet. So I would say yes.
We're hearing that a lot these days. People are becoming very comfortable with talking about their soul family on the Pleiades and many different planets, some which I've never even heard of. So the app does apparently combine ancient wisdom with modern tools. What was that process?
Yeah, after my severe illness, and it took me about a year to recover, I had this space that I don't think was a mistake to really think about what structure do I wish existed when I was first embarking on this journey. And as a science-oriented person, I love structure. And so SoulPod is that structure for the seekers, for the people who are dedicated to their awakening, to learning how to open the aperture of awareness at will, and to learn how to move up and down the gradient of consciousness. And so the app itself, I really wanted it to be personalized, not just to help you sleep better or reduce stress, even though that is an outcome, but better understanding what's your relationship to ambition, to your truth, expression, to fear, shame, worthiness. Understanding that and then pairing you with breath work, meditation, mantra in some cases, in a very intentional series of practices over 21 days. And so that's the foundation of SoulPod. It's truly a spiritual journey app, not just one-off practices. And so that was very intentional. And I believe heavily in nervous system regulation, being able to move in and out of states of being when you need to. And so we equip you with those tools so that you're safe enough to go deeper. You can go quite deep in the app.
Sounds like you said there's layers of work to be done, and it isn't like really a casual thing. Like you say, it's made for what we call light workers, right?
Exactly.
Okay. We hear a lot about New Earth, Ascension, moving into, I believe it's the Aquarian age. What insight have your experience given you about that shift?
It's a great question. I think that and my guides have talked to me about this, is that it's a very unique time on the planet. We've gone through times of great change before, absolutely. But the unique element of this time in particular is that we're shifting as a collective, not just as a nation or a region, but as a truly planetary species. And that hasn't really been the case before this time. And we combine that with the awakening process, which is happening at the same time of all these global changes. I think that the big thing we're being asked to step into in this new earth, new age, is to realize who it is that we really are, which is an interdimensional species, not just a physical one. And to start to take that seriously and to start to activate this system, this latent system within us, and realize ourselves as these interdimensionals. And as we do, the reality that we interact with also changes. And so I think that's when people talk about the new earth and this new age, I think that's a core component of it.
It's a great explanation. And it goes back to the point that are we all star seeds or star beings or not? Because that's pretty much where we came from anyway. I agree. It seems to be a very interesting time, and we're hearing a lot about the extraterrestrials, which we'll get to in a moment. You mentioned that you did have a sickness. Now, at one point, did that coincide with the near-death experience, or was that a separate event?
Yeah, one and the same. Got very sick in 2020. You can guess what that was related to. Very long story short, I was working in biotech, so I was actually working on pandemic response in the Bay Area. And before that happened, I was having premonitions that something was coming. I had done a meditation intensive in January, and I was starting to see and feel that something was coming. And I was starting to see it in the context of what I believe to be a past life which was really quite trippy because this past life kept on coming up during my near-death experience. And I think it's simultaneous lives, right? So it's all happening at once. What I was going through was tied to that lifetime for some reason. And it was like medieval times. There was a war and there was a pandemic. He had gone off to war, been injured, but survived, and then came back to his family had died from the pandemic. And so he was very bitter, recluse, grew old, and did not have a very good life. But as I was going through my experience, I was seeing him and something shifted. And for some reason, whatever work I had done had karmically shifted his life. And maybe his life shifted mine, but I saw him not become a recluse. I saw him become a teacher, have a new family, work with children. And I could see him from above. Looking down on him was the last time that I saw him after I was recovering. And he looked up. And it was just this really epic full circle experience. But that was something that was not typically something I experience, but it was in the context of my illness. But as I got sicker and sicker, my analytical mind could only take me so far. I had all the best doctors and scientists working with me, and there was no solution, right? And so I got cytokine storms in my lungs, which was really what was killing people at the time. And so I knew I was in trouble. I could feel the heat in my lungs, the cold, and then the stiffness. That's the storms. And my nervous system was starting to collapse. My cardiovascular system was starting to collapse. I could no longer walk. And so I ended up in quarantine in the hospital. My husband couldn't come with me. That was really quite challenging and scary. But then I had this experience, and I was coming in and out of my body this whole time. I didn't end up going towards the light, though I felt death nearby. And that is a really interesting experience because it's the most familiar, unfamiliar thing. It's like, oh, I remember you. We've been around each other before. It's like an old friend knocking at your door that you didn't expect. And so I knew that there was a timeline that I passed on. I could feel it. And so there was really maybe not a conscious choice, but a higher mind choice. Do I stay? And am I clear on why I stay? And at one point, I just had this incredible experience of surrender, which the best way I can describe that, it's not a giving up like I mentioned before. It's like a falling back into life. And then accessing this higher mind, this higher intelligence, moving out of the body into this kind of like void space. And once I did that, I somehow was able to surrender to that degree. I could feel a call for help go out, not from my conscious mind. Again, it seemed like from a higher mind. And then immediately there was a response. And a being was in my presence that was incredibly powerful, loving. I wouldn't call it God per se. I think it was more of a guide. They worked on my energetic system. I felt my first center light up, the space between my eyebrows light up, my heart space. So it just went like 1, 2, 3. And I was back in my body, and I wasn't completely out of the woods at that point, but I had a feeling I was going to be okay, that I was going to stay. Not because I was afraid of dying, but because I was afraid of not living my purpose in this lifetime. That was the motivation for staying. And so that was quite the experience.
Yeah, it sounds like it. Now, with the near-death experience, because you had premonitions and instances of those kind of abilities before, but after the NDE, did you feel like your abilities were heightened? Did they go up a few notches or not really?
Definitely accelerated after that. I think it accelerated because of those transcendental out-of-body experiences. And I was like, oh, that exists. That level of surrender exists. That realm exists. It's there. You just have to get out of your own way so that you can receive it. And the ET contact, the ability to go deeper and deeper into meditation seemed to be more and more accessible after that experience as well. And after I had some ET contact experiences, that again accelerated quite a bit.
Did that begin after the NDE, or did you have glimpses of ETs or interdimensional beings even before that?
I had glimpses before that. They first reached out in the dream state in probably like 2011, 2012. And I knew it was not a normal dream. I knew it was an encounter. It was an experience, and a deeply personal one. They approached me in a way that was incredibly intelligent so that it wouldn't scare me, but I knew what it was. And they said that over the years to come, they would be able to help and they would start to present themselves more and more. And it was always my free will choice to engage or not. And sure enough, exactly as they had outlined, I started having those experiences over the last 10 years or so. And it definitely accelerated, I would say, even in the last 6 months. It's become very much more intense.
Ascension and moving into the Aquarian age. How does the ET contact and what we've been hearing that we're going to see an event in the next year or two, how is that related or is it not related?
Oh, I have so much to say about this.
Okay, that's why we're here.
Yeah, it's a really important conversation right now. There's so many layers to this that's happening. So it's very much not, as you can imagine, one-dimensional, this answer. And so the layers to this are, it is one and the same, really, the awakening, this new age. Part of that awakening is by awakening into who it is that we really are, which is an interdimensional species. We can't really do that and not also be in contact with the interdimensional beings, that realm. So they go hand in hand. As we awaken to who it is that we really are, we're awakening to the relationship with this universe, which includes these relationships with these all kinds of different beings and realms that most of us aren't even aware yet exist. That's really obviously exciting, but there's like steps to take into this relationship because from my experiences, they're not as interested in landing on the White House front lawn as we've been programmed to think. If you really think about that, that would be a kind of domineering way to present themselves. And these beings are, at least the ones I have contact with, are highly benevolent. They are much more interested, not in a show of domination or even of hierarchy. They're much more interested in relationship, in kinship, and making sure that we understand that. And so I think what we're going to see is more and more people, individuals, having direct contact. It's this grassroots approach to contact. They want you, anybody listening, they want you to have your own experience with them so that we don't get all caught up in, is this real? Is this not? Who are they? Are they demons? They're not, by the way. And so I think that our kind of like media-based framing of contact is not how it's actually going to play out. And I think that you're going to have the capacity, every single one of us, to develop your own relationship with these beings. And there's different levels of beings. My guides that I channel are 8th dimensional collective. They're non-physical. They also work with these more physical beings that are like contact scout groups. And so they're working directly on the planet. And one of my jobs is to better understand them so I can explain to others who they are.
You're like an ambassador.
Kind of. I'm still learning. I'm very much in the early stages of it, but that's what I've been told, yeah.
One of the things that I hear is that there are benevolent ETs and not so benevolent ETs. And a popular theory is that there are races, several, that want to keep us trapped in this 3D matrix. And then there's another group, the benevolent ones that want to help us escape the matrix. And one of the more interesting conversations I've had, this is from an episode I did recently, MD Seelig, who, long story made short, had access to the secret space program. What he said was, we have to raise our love vibration to a point where let's say the Draco reptilians cannot exist in that space anymore, then they have to leave. Now, I've heard this more than once. What are your thoughts?
I totally agree with that, 100%. And there's a few reasons why. For me personally, I've worked on my consciousness to such a level, and I have a long way to go because I've been in direct contact with these light beings, and it really humbles you quick of like how high their frequency is and trying to meet it. But the lower extraterrestrial experiences aren't really on my radar personally because I just don't engage or experience it. There's that. And then I agree with him. I call it love and above frequency. As you start to, and especially as a collective, access that, these lower vibrational experiences across the board can't travel there. They just can't. It's not compatible. So that's something for people that get really wrapped up in the more dark side of this, even the government manipulation side of it. My advice is you can acknowledge it, say, okay, I see that, but don't stay in that rabbit hole. Take your head out and focus on, okay, where do I want to go? What do I want to experience? And I think that's going to be really valuable. The other thing to think about, and this is what I understand more deeply working with the eighth dimensional collective, is that as you raise your vibration, they start to understand that there's so much more power, quantum power, interdimensional consciousness power in the love and above frequency, that it actually limits the species that can't raise their frequency to that level. And so it starts to not make any sense for an advanced civilization to operate below that. It just fundamentally doesn't make any sense. You're not going to continue to evolve and expand if you don't. And so it becomes much more of not a nice experience to have, but a technological evolution on why you would raise your frequency into those realms. And so once they do that and they become truly interdimensional, which I don't think you can in the lower frequencies, you get stifled because it requires that higher frequency to have that level of communication, travel, and experience of these dimensions. So I really do think that for most of these civilizations that are interdimensional, they've had to evolve past fear.
And that's one of the tripping points of our civilization, is to make that leap from this age to the next. Eliminating the fear or getting past it is one of the most important things, isn't it?
For sure. Yeah. It's that journey from fear to faith, but having a new relationship with faith. You can either place faith in your fear or faith in your trust. Where do you want to place it?
I think trust is probably the better bet at this point.
I think so.
I'm hoping it is. Your guides are basically interdimensional beings, right? Are they one and the same with some of the ETs? Or are they related? How exactly does that work?
I'm learning every day that I have been in communication with them, but I've learned that they're purely non-physical. They can take form partially for our own benefit as a light body. And they did in my living room when the channel first came on board. It was a very intense experience that they wanted me to really get it. That this was real. And I did after that. They've explained that other species had helped them during these times. And so they're helping us. But that they're not necessarily the same species that I'm seeing in the sky or in some of my other experiences. But they are also in relationship with them. They're also their guides.
Okay.
It's interesting. They're not necessarily the ones I'm seeing in the ships. That's more like the Pleiadians and other species that we don't even have names for yet. But that particular collective is truly a collective, and they're guiding from the eighth dimension, but can move through dimensions as well.
It sounds like we're moving into, hopefully, a brave new world.
I think so. I'm optimistic.
Yeah, I think we have to be at this point.
Yeah.
Regarding let's just call them ETs for now. I'm sure there's many gradients to that, but is there anything else other than what you just told us that we need to know about them or from them?
I think that it's a great adventure. I'm working on my fear when I come in contact with them. There's all kinds of modes of contact. I think that we're expecting the visual in the sky, which I've certainly got, full ships, a science fiction movie type of experience that really blows the analytical mind. That happens. But what's even more interesting to me is the communication and experience through energy and consciousness. These beings, I can feel their presence in my central channel. My Kundalini starts moving. You can have all kinds of variations of contact. It can be very physical. I've also had on-the-ground healing experiences where they have upgraded my nervous system and my energy body and was never the same after that. So that can happen. We've had them come down to the ground like 100 feet away in ways that are not too threatening. So It's this dancing sequence of contact, and it's really all around your willingness, because you're always going to have a little fear because this is something new, and they can help you with that fear. But I think the big thing that they look for, if this is something you want to embark on, is the willingness. Are you open? Are you interested? And if you are, I think this time they will show up.
Have any of these beings, your guides included, given you any clue to what your galactic home was?
Oh, that's interesting. I've had some people that I've been doing channeling with ask them questions about me, which is really interesting to see what comes through. But they've said that I was one of them, that I'm part of that collective. I've just taken physical form in this dimension. And many different star systems. The Pleiades seems to come up quite a bit. And on Earth, there seems to be a connection to ancient Egypt, where there was work with these blue beings back then. There was a relationship. There was even training around how to stabilize to their frequency so you can be in more direct physical contact. It's really interdimensional contact, but you can be in more direct relationship. And in ancient Greece, that's the other thing that I've seen as far as this particular collective. They were involved in the oracles of ancient Greece, and they made it very clear they're not looking to be put on a pedestal. Their job is to help us realize how powerful we are. That's what they're most interested in. But yeah, they've given me a few clues into where I've bounced around in the universe.
You've had a past life, right? So that had to give you some insight into our origins, which means you didn't just have one. You've probably had several, if not hundreds. And some of those lives were off planet. Seems like the shame of talking about that has decreased a bit. It's not a big deal anymore. So it's being more normalized.
I think so. And I think with more of this contact, we're going to realize how connected we already are, even physically, biologically, that we didn't evolve on this planet in a petri dish, right? Some things have happened in our past, and we have galactic brothers and sisters in the physical realm as well. And we'll learn a lot more, I think, about our actual history.
And hopefully soon. Can't wait for that. Anything else we should know, at least for tonight?
I think there's always more, but I think that's good for tonight.
Okay, fair enough. All right. Thanks for joining us, Crystal. Very interesting. In the meantime, how can our listeners find you online?
You can find me at soulpodapp.com. You can find SoulPod on the iOS App Store. We're working on Android. And you can find us on Instagram at soulpod_. And I also personally write on Substack. I do like an energetic download of the week, and you can find me there as well.
You've been listening to Closer to Venus. I'm Johnny Burke. If you enjoyed tonight's episode, please consider subscribing. In the meantime, you can find more info on closertovenus.com. Thanks again for tuning in, and we'll see you next time.